a game. He said, it is a lifestyle. And the other boys hooted and hollered and applauded. It would be unusual to find a girl who would say the same thing about Candy Crush, although I did recently see a girl who was wearing Candy Crush leggings. So again, Anderson and Gentili find that the average boy in the United States spends about 13 hours a week playing video games. I'm not talking about just surfing the web, I'm talking about specifically playing a dedicated video game. That compares to about 4 hours a week for the average girl. What's the relation between time spent playing video games and academic achievement? Again, Anderson and Gentili have looked at this. And what they find is that below a threshold of 6 hours a week, there is no relation between time spent playing video games and academic achievement. A kid who spends 5 hours a week playing video games does no better or no worse, on average, than the kid who doesn't play video games at all. Beyond that threshold of 6 hours a week, there is a linear and negative relation, which is a fancy way of saying the kid who spends 10 hours a week playing video games does less well than the kid who spends 5 hours a week playing video games. The kid who spends 20 hours a week playing video games will do much less well in school, on average, than the kid who doesn't play video games. And I asked Professor Anderson, why is that so? And Professor Anderson has been very generous with his time. And he answered with one word. His one word is displacement. Displacement. What does he mean when he says displacement? What he means is that if you're spending 20 hours a week playing video games, that's 20 hours a week you're not doing something else, like homework or sleeping. American kids increasingly are sleep deprived, and sleep deprivation certainly impairs academic performance. And this particular correlation holds without regard to video game content. As we'll see, video game content matters on some very important parameters, but this is not one of them. So in your handout, you'll find some guidelines which Anderson and Gentili have created based on their research. No more than 40 minutes a night on school nights, no more than an hour a day on weekends, and your minutes do not roll over. If you go 3 weeks without playing video games, that doesn't mean you're allowed to spend 7 hours on a Saturday playing video games. But to enforce this rule, you must insist no devices in the bedroom. There be no devices in the bedroom, no mobile phones in the bedroom, no screens in the bedroom. So the subtitle of my book, Boys Adrift, the subtitle is The 5 Factors Driving the Growing Epidemic of Unmotivated Boys and Underachieving Young Men. Unmotivated boys. So there seem to be quite a number of high schools in the United States where the English teacher will require kids to write a letter to a living author about a book that the author has written. Because I'm on the receiving end of these letters, and they come in a large packet from the school with a school return address. But there doesn't seem to be any requirement that the letters be kind or courteous. And the boys are often quite hostile. And they attack that phrase about unmotivated boys. They say, that's totally wrong, they say. We're incredibly motivated to get to the next mission in Grand Theft Auto. We just don't care about Spanish. And I think the boys have a good point. Video games shift motivation away from the real world to the virtual world. And again, the researchers find if this boy is spending 20 hours a week playing video games, it's very likely that his friends are also spending lots of time playing video games. And what's going to boost your status in that peer group is being the first to finish all the missions in Grand Theft Auto. Getting an A instead of a B in Spanish is not going to boost your status in that group. It may actually lower your status in that group. Video games in the United States are rated E for everybody, T for teen, or M for mature. And again, Anderson and Gentile have done the key research here. Longitudinal cohort studies, where they enroll more than 3,000 kids around 12 years of age and interview each kid. These studies require an immense investment of time and staff. And they do various formal psychological inventories to quantify to what extent is this individual child altruistic or selfish, honest or dishonest, patient or impatient, gentle or hostile. And they control for every demographic parameter: race, ethnicity, household income, religion, language spoken at home, parental involvement, parental education. What video games is this kid playing? And how much time does he spend playing them? So the way to conceptualize this particular study, again, which is cited in your handout, is to imagine two boys who are identical. Two boys who have the same race, ethnicity, language spoken at home, religion, family composition, household income, parental involvement. They're the same on all those parameters. The only difference is that in one home, the boy is allowed to play any game he likes in the privacy of his bedroom. In the other home, the parents do not allow the boy to play M-rated games, but other than that, he can play any game he likes. Excuse me. And that boy is playing mostly the sports game, like Madden NFL football, FIFA soccer, NBA basketball. The boy who's playing the sports games, the E-rated games, you follow him for 3 years, you do not find any change, any shift in personality based on what video games he's playing. But the boy playing the violent video games, Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, he changes. He becomes more selfish, less honest, less patient, more hostile. And the size of that effect is substantial. The difference between the boy who's spending 20 hours a week playing the sports game and 20 hours a week, and the other boy who's spending 20 hours a week playing the violent game is comparable to the difference between a boy who was raised in a loving home and a boy who was raised in a violent and abusive home. And the fact that this boy happens to be living in a loving and nurturing home does not protect him from this effect. And interestingly, the boy has no insight into how he is changing. So, for example, one of the clever things Anderson and Gentile do, the boy at age 12 is in the room being interviewed by the technician. And another staff person places a $20 bill, thank you, a $20 bill on the floor outside the room where the boy will be sure to see the bill when he exits the room. Thank you. So the boy finishes with the technician, leaves the room, sees the $20 bill. At age 12, almost all the boys will pick up the bill, walk it back to the room, and say, hey, somebody dropped a $20 bill in the hallway. Would you turn it in lost and found? Make sure that, when they report it, they can get it back. Now fast forward 3 years. You're doing the evaluation again, psychological assessment. And while you're doing that, once again, another technician drops a $20 bill on the ground, on the floor, in the hallway, outside the room. The boy who's been playing the sports games exits the room, sees a $20 bill, brings it back to the technician and says, hey, somebody dropped a $20 bill in the hallway, would you make sure it gets to lost and found? The funniest thing, same exact thing happened 3 years ago. I don't know what's wrong with this place. The boy who's been playing Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, and other violent games exits the room, goes into the hallway, sees a $20 bill, looks around, doesn't see anybody, picks up the bill and puts it in his pocket and leaves the facility. But when you ask that boy, have you changed in any way? Are you any less honest than you used to be? Has your integrity changed? He will insist he has not changed at all. As human beings, we judge our own morality relative to our neighbors. So very humanistic. It turns out that boys who spend 20 hours a week playing violent video games are typically hanging out with other boys who spend 20 hours a week playing violent video games. And they're all changing. But they're not changing relative to one another. And so the boy insists that he has not changed at all, because from his relative perspective, he hasn't changed. He's not any different relative to his neighbors. But he is relative to the boy he was 3 years ago. Not all violent video games are the same. Some are worse than others. By worse, I mean that the game pushes this shift in personality farther and faster than other games. The games which push this shift farthest and fastest, the shift from honest to dishonest, from gentle to hostile, from kind to unkind. The games that push this shift farthest and fastest are games that employ what Anderson and Gentili call a moral inversion. Moral inversion, they mean that in the context of the game, good is bad and bad is good. So in Grand Theft Auto, in order to complete your mission, you will need money and weapons. And you can get really good weapons if you kill police officers and take their weapons. So in the context of the game, it makes good sense to sneak up on police officers and kill them before they know what you're up to and take their weapons. Now, in the real world, to kill police officers because they're police officers and take their weapons would be really evil. But in the context of the game, it's a good and clever thing to do. If you want to play the game, you must assume a male avatar. There are no female avatars. You cannot play the game as a woman. You must assume the role of a man. There are women in the game. Most of them are prostitutes. And you can have sex with them if you want to. You go up to her, she'll tell you how much, and you give her that money. And then you can watch your avatar flop on top of her. But in order to complete your mission, you need money. And so in the context of the game, it makes good sense then to shoot her, to kill her by shooting her in the head with your weapon. And as the blood pours out and she dies very realistically, moans and dies, you can then take your money back from her. You can only get your money back by killing her. You don't have to do that, but in the context of the game, it makes good sense to do that. That's a moral inversion. In the context of the game, good is bad and bad is good. Lawmakers in Sacramento said, "Are you kidding me? This is the most popular game in the United States, Grand Theft Auto. And you're telling me that it changes kids, that it causes them to be less honest, less patient, more hostile?" They flew Anderson and Gentili to Sacramento to give sworn testimony to the California State Assembly and to meet one-on-one with individual lawmakers who had further questions. And they wrote a law making it a civil offense to sell the worst games to a minor child. They said, look, any adult can buy any game. We're not in any way restricting what adults do. And any adult can buy any game and give it to a child. Unlike the situation with alcohol or cigarettes, we are not criminalizing giving these games to a child. If parents want their kids to play these games, then they can. But we're trying to support the authority of parents. The lawmakers were very clear about this. And if a parent doesn't want their kid to play this game, we don't want this kid to be able to go into any store and buy this game at age 10 or 12 or 14. We want to support the authority of parents. The law was signed into law by then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. The video game industry promptly brought suit, claiming that the California statute violated their First Amendment rights of free speech. The ACLU joined the video game industry in contesting the law. The lawsuit went to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court, in a decision written by Justice Antonin Scalia, ruled that the California statute did indeed violate the Constitution, rendered it null and void, threw it out. Justice Samuel Alito wrote a concurrence, which I found very poignant. In Justice Alito's concurrence, he said, look, I have read the research of Anderson and Gentile, and I share the concerns that parents and lawmakers in California have expressed. I'm very troubled that kids playing these games become more hostile, less patient. These games should not be played by children. I completely agree. He said, nevertheless, it is the ruling of this court that governing what games children will play is not the job of the California State Assembly, it is the job of the parent. And I've included a link to the full text of Justice Alito's concurrence and Justice Scalia's opinion in your handout, because I think every parent who lives in this country needs to know that there is no one else minding the store. Any kid can go into any store and buy any game. A few stores have policies restricting the sale of games to minor children, but that's a store policy, it's not a law. There can be no law in this country restricting the sale of any game, because the United States Supreme Court has said that there can be no law restricting the sale of any game. It's your job. You have to know, if your son is going to a friend's house, you must call the friend's parents and ask, will there be a grown-up there? Will there be restrictions on what video games are played? And if the answer is no, they can play whatever games they want. Or if the parent shows no comprehension of your question, like, well, why should we bother what games the kids are playing? Then you must tell your son, I'm sorry, you can't go there. And your son may be upset. And you have to answer, too bad. And your son asks why. And your answer is, because I'm your parent, that's why. You can, if you like, hand them a copy of my book, Boys Adrift, where they'll find the Anderson and Gentile research, but you don't need to. It's not your job to persuade your child. It is your job to raise your child. I want to share in this regard a story from a doctor I have enormous regard and respect, Dr. Meg Meeker, primary care pediatrician here in Michigan, and the author of several really excellent books for parents. My favorite is Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters by Dr. Meg Meeker. And Dr. Meeker and I were jointly guests on the Today Show last year, and we spent an hour together in the green room, and she told me a really interesting and funny story about video games. She has 4 children, 3 daughters and her youngest, her son Walter. And she knows all this research about video games. And she told her son, "You're not playing any video games, period." And he was absolutely outraged from childhood and through adolescence. He said, "You are making me such a freak, because not only will you not let me play games, you won't let me play games at friends' houses. I'm like the only kid in the state of Michigan who's not allowed to play video games. You're totally horrible. You're ruining my whole life." And she's like, "Too bad. You're not playing video games." So he's working various part-time jobs. And at age 18, he turns 18, and he says to his mom, "Look, I've got my own money that I earned working these part-time jobs. I'm going to go buy an Xbox, and I'm going to buy Call of Duty, and I'm going to play it." And Mom was like, "Fine." So then he goes off to college, and toward the end of his first year at college, he calls up his mom and says, "Hey, I just got $400. I think I did it." And she said, "I have no idea." He said, "I just sold my Xbox and all my video games." He said he got to college and there were all these guys who expected you to be really impressed that they can kill 12 aliens in Halo in 10 seconds. And Walter is like, "Dude, you can't even talk to girls. You know, like, why should I be impressed that you can kill these imaginary enemies in an imaginary video game? Dude, you have no life. It's a video game." But he found that the young men had no insight into this. They think you should be really impressed that they can do all these amazing things with their thumbs. And he didn't want that. The human brain is plastic at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years of age. And if you allow a boy to spend many hours at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years of age playing video games, those games imprint on the brain. They change the brain. The younger the person is when an addiction forms, the harder it is to quit. And that's true whether you're talking cigarettes, alcohol, or video games. You need to restrict and govern your son's use of video games. Allow him to acquire other interests, other passions, in the real healthier. And then at age 18, he can, if he chooses, turn and play video games. He'll be older and better able to make a grown-up decision. Video games are largely a boy's issue, the toxicity of video games. When you look at who's addicted to video games, or separately at the question of who's spending 20 hours a week playing the violent video games, on both those parameters, Anderson and Gentile find that boys outnumber girls by more than 10 to 1. So this is much more of a boys' issue than it is a girls' issue. But girls have their own issues. And one of those issues for girls is social media. And this has all happened quickly. 10 years ago, Facebook was still mostly just a university. 12 years ago, Facebook did not exist. According to Nielsen, more than half of American girls age 11 and 12 are on Instagram. And that certainly appears to be true here based on my conversation with the students an hour ago. Instagram's only 5 years old. Launched in October 2010. Obviously, from my tone of voice and my facial expression, you can gather that I think that's a problem. Well, how can I defend that concern? To understand why social media are a problem, and more of a problem for girls than for boys, I think it's helpful to contrast a girl living today with a girl living in ancient times. By ancient times, I mean 1995, 20 years ago. So let's imagine a girl in 1995. It's the evening, and she's writing in her diary. By which I mean she's writing with a pen in a bound volume of blank pages. She's writing about who she likes, who she doesn't like, why she doesn't like them, the kind of girl she really does like, the kind of woman she hopes to become. She might write 5 pages in an evening. She's not going to show it to anybody. If she has a younger brother, she might even keep it under lock and key. But she's doing some very important work. She's figuring out, who am I? Who do I want to become? And what do I really want? That's not trivial. American psychologist Dr. Abraham Maslow said that figuring out what you really want is not trivial. That many adults never really figure it out. And they're miserable because they're working hard at a job they don't like in pursuit of goals that are not meaningful to them. She's doing some important work. But when I met with the kids an hour ago here, or yesterday in Canton, I asked them, who's on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook? All the hands go up. Who has a diary? Almost no hands go up. The social media have crowded out the diary. There's not room enough in the day for both. And the social media are more important because other kids are watching. As one girl said to me, if you go 24 hours without posting anything, people will think you have like no life. So the pressure is on. So I asked the students, what's the difference between posting a photo on Instagram and writing in a diary? And one answer that girls will give is, well, Instagram is better because Instagram has pictures and a diary doesn't. And that's certainly true. But then I keep asking until I get the answer I'm looking for, which is that Instagram is public and the diary is private. Joan Jacobs-Bromberg is a historian at Cornell, and she has what is probably the world's largest collection of diaries. She's got a huge collection of diaries from American girls going back to the 1700s. And she has concluded that for most of the 20th century, the majority, more than half, of American girls kept some form of diary. Right through 2000, but not anymore. In 15 years, the diary has essentially vanished from the lived experience of American girls. It used to be common, it is now rare. Displaced by social media. When researchers look at social media pages of girls and boys, you don't find any 5-page essays about what sort of person I want to grow up to be. What you find are lots of photos. Mike Stefano, looking nationwide in this country, has looked at these photos quantitatively and qualitatively. Who posts more photos, girls or boys? Well, girls do. How much more? 50% more? 80% more? No, it's 500% more. Girls post 5 times as many photos as the boys do. And the photos are different. So a boy and a girl both go to the football game. And they both take pictures at the game. The boy is taking a picture at the game, or the pretty cheerleader at the game. The girl's turning the camera on herself, and she's taking 100 photos of herself at the game. And then that evening, she's going through the 100 photos to find 2 or 3 where she's laughing and the kids around her are laughing, and she posts those on her Instagram. Here I am at the game, we had a great time. Madison goes to the party, takes 100 pictures at the party. That evening goes through the 100 pictures to find 2 or 3 where she's having fun, posts those on her Instagram. Here I am at the game, here I am at the party, we had a great time. The difference between the diary and the Facebook page is the difference between living and performing. Now, there's nothing wrong with a performance. A performance is a show that you put on to entertain or amuse or impress other people. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you realize that the performance has to come to an end. And you take off the mask and resume your real life. But talking with girls in this country, what troubles me is that for many of these girls, the performance never ends. They are hyper-connected to other girls their own age by this, what I call the cyber bubble of 24/7 texting and social media. Hyper-connected to other girls their own age, but disconnected from themselves. So I met with Kathy Charles at her office at Napier University. And she's done some very interesting research. She has found that the more time a girl spends on social media like Facebook or Instagram, the more likely the girl is to become anxious or depressed. But this is less true or not at all true for boys. Why is that? Well, she didn't know when I met with her. And so she was very interested by what I had to share with her about the research of Alex Jordan, Carol Dweck, and their colleagues at Stanford. What Carol Dweck and her colleagues at Stanford have found is that girls are very ready to believe that other girls are having more fun than they are, that other girls' lives are more interesting than their own. This is not at all true for boys. Turns out that boys overestimate how interesting their own life is. Boys think everyone else should be really interested in what they're doing. And that's not a surprising finding. It's very much in line with other research in gender studies. For example, teenage girls typically underestimate how attractive they are. They rate themselves as being less pretty than their friends rate them as being. Whereas teenage boys consistently overestimate how good looking they are. They think they're better looking than their peers rate them as being. So it's not surprising that the Stanford researchers found that girls are very ready to believe that other girls are having more fun than they are. Now put all these findings together. The fact that girls are more invested in social media. If you don't like Jacob's picture of the football game, he doesn't care. But if you don't like Sonia's photo of Sonia at the football game, she's going to take it more personally. Girls spend more time on social media. The boys are more likely to be invested in the video games. And it turns out that girls post only a small and very selective sliver of their lived experience.